scholar, and so there are several hats that he dons, and more importantly, he magically has about 72 hours in a day, right? So that's how we all know Gautham. And very warm welcome to Gautham to Mysore. I think as an author, this is his first visit to Mysore, and I'm sure it is going to be first of many more to come. And to discuss his latest speculative fiction book, that is The Sentence, which came out about 6 months back, 3 months back. We have with us Gautham Chenoy, who has very kindly agreed to be the discussant today and prompt BHATIA into, I'm sure he'll have hard questions for BHATIA, and perhaps even have hard critiques. That is what is expected of Chenoy. Right? And he's a very well-known sci-fi buff, critique aficionado, and a band event here once a Saturday every month, right? Yeah, trying to Saturday every month, and he's also a quizzer. Gautham and Gautham with the Gautham font. So I thought Sambhakabar must be. So thank you very much.
So if there's anyone out there, tough questions. He's a lawyer after all. Right, so we are here to speak with Gautham about this book. And this book is actually many things, right? You could look at it as a fantasy world legal thriller. You could approach it as a murder mystery. It of course is the fact that it all expands on a what if, right? While he has stated that it's not alternate history because it's a secondary word. So it's many things, right? So basically it's set in the world of Peruma, right? So what has happened is that there was a revolution.
Comes from a cemetery in Paris where they have buried all the people who perished in the Paris Commune. There is a wall at the end of the cemetery where, and many of those are unmarked graves because they were shot. They were shot on that wall, and now they have this epigraph over there, or Mort de la Commune. So that's where I got it from. And
just for historical, historical context.
Yeah, so I'll explain that, right? So the Paris Commune was an event in history. It was 1871, and the Prussians had just defeated France in war, and as they were withdrawing, the workers of Paris rose up, as they had done many times in the past, but this time the workers actually took control of Paris. And there was a 3-month period where they governed Paris, and they tried to put into place what was a non-hierarchical society. So equality, genuine equality, right to work, representatives who can be recalled at will, the distance between parliamentarians and the people completely, vanished, a public militia, not a standing army. They tried to put into place all these things that would, create an egalitarian society. Of course, the French state and the army did not like that. And so in 3 months' time, the army came in, and after a very, very violent street-by-street struggle, the commune was suppressed, and about 10,000, 20,000 people were murdered, executed, and they were buried in that cemetery where that line is. But the Paris Commune became, therefore, legendary because of this, both because of what it did and because of the way it ended. And in the 20th century, you had many examples of people trying to imitate that. So during the Chinese Revolution in Guangzhou, they tried to establish a Guangzhou Commune. 1 month it lasted, and then again the Chinese army came in, and again the same thing happened. So there are these times in history where, for brief moments, workers have managed to temporarily try to put into place a society which is equal. It has never really worked. And so one of the animating themes was, what if it did? What if this time the revolution actually succeeded and they were able to hold their own for a while and have their own little autonomous society? And that's where it began. And given that the Paris Commune was an inspiration for that plot point, the epigraph therefore made sense in that respect.
And what role does ethics play? And what is the responsibility of the person? And it does it very well because it's a very sort of talky.
A story that is about ethical and moral dilemmas and people trying to work through them, and figure out where they stand. And whereas often in genre writing, and this is now changing I think a lot, but often in genre writing there is a very clear moral position that you can sense this is the right side and this is the wrong side. There is a lot of talk nowadays about morally grey characters, but they're not really morally grey. I mean, it's just like, I think, again, none of the debates in this book are a creation, of my own head. These are debates that have been really central to our lives, not just in India, but letting go of justice is just, I think, something that's there in our collective, history. And exploring that was therefore an idea in the book, and where the law and the courts comes in is when you try and enforce that.
The Paris Commune. Even the communes in Spain during the Civil War. More recently, the autonomous region of Java. All these ones. So all of these are cited by anarchists as possible experiments, but as I pointed out, they're defeated by the military powers of the time. And I'm myself quite interested in, and I'm just curious, why do you think people sort of scoff at this idea that human beings are decent enough to organize themselves, and why do you think there's such a strong pushback to that idea?
Right? So if you see around yourself, a certain kind of character which is dominant, then you tend to think that is human nature. And the idea that is because social structures and institutions incentivize a certain kind of selfishness and behavior. It's harder to get there, right? Because intuitively you see people behaving in a certain way. And that's why for anarchism, prefiguration is so important, right? The idea that, and this is something that is there at one point in the book, anarchists call it building the new in the ruins of the old, right? So while you can't in one stroke change the world, you can create these little pockets of space where you create different institutions and then watch people act differently, and then use that as an example to like go beyond that. So that people are trying that, and I think prefiguration therefore is really important for anarchist thought. I think to answer the question, it's because you draw conclusions about human nature based on what you see, and that's often not the whole story, right?
Letting go of justice in the service of peace. But then we also see experiments like, say, political experiments like, say, the peace and reconciliation, or the Nuremberg trials, where there has been an attempt to create justice, which has also been deeply flawed. And so then, what is the alternative? Because letting go, bringing it back up in other.
And then either you have bloodshed, or you move on. So I don't think there is an answer. Difference between two ideas of tragedy, the Greek idea and the Renaissance idea of tragedy. So the Greek idea of tragedy is what you get in Oedipus Rex, Oedipus the king, the play, where Oedipus, it is a prophecy that he will kill his father and marry his mother. So therefore he is banished at childhood, and he's sent off to somewhere far away, and then at some point he comes back. He meets a stranger at a crossroads. They get into a quarrel, and there's a fight, and he ends up accidentally killing the stranger. He goes back to his city, and because of that, he's made the king, and he marries the queen. It turns out that the stranger was his father, and the queen was his mother, and so then, of course, all hell breaks loose because,
And all that. But one part that we should not forget is that it's also a murder mystery, right? See, one thing also is about this. I mean, all this. I mean, it's good, right? But it's the murder mystery that drives it. Because at the end of the day, you want to know who did it, right? You want to know
Christie's and Sherlock Holmes and all that. But actually, the murder mysteries I love are Japanese murder mysteries, and in that the writer I love is Kigo Higashino. Suspect X is the famous one, and his latest book just came out. It's fantastic, and I think like what Higashino does, and in a certain sense I follow that process. Of course, like he is the master, So it's a very difficult thing to do. In Higashino, like there are two things that happen. One is that yes, it does matter who did it, but that's not the main thing that is important. In fact, around midway through a Higashino novel, it is reasonably clear who did it. Reasonably clear. Not fully, but reasonably clear. Yeah, I get that. And then you realize that actually it was never about who did it. Like that's a minor point in the whole book. The real thing is the why, and through that, the darkness of the human psyche, right? Like why people act the way they do. And a revolution of the workers, much like the French Revolution, and that led to the establishment of the commune. And there's a constant economic conflict between them, because actually in this novel, the city's wealth comes from mining, the element called Mandelium, mining, and there is this constant dispute over how do you share the revenue from the mines, and then can you have an equal society based on that. So those are basically the main themes, and so the book is more about a conflict over economic justice between a more traditional way of living and a commune way of living. So that's how what I
So what would be an example? Because there's one thing is punishment, and the other should be reward.
Yeah. So for instance, like in this book, there's a discussion around this whole thing that if there is this pact or treaty where you try and actually
Question of peace versus justice. Right? There is an implied presumption that justice is centered around punishment. Is that there is also this movement to sort of reimagine the idea of justice to include and co-opt peace or closure or the idea of truth as an alternative to punishment. So it is not as if if you are letting go of justice, you are only letting go of punishment. Is that also a theme that is explored or perhaps?
So that is truth and reconciliation, right? So the idea is that that's not enough, right? So it's not enough to say that, okay, we will tell the truth about what happened in apartheid, and that's good enough. Because clearly for many people it's not. They want accountability that goes beyond just telling the truth. They want some kind of closure through some kind of punishment, right? It may not be death penalty, it may not be incarceration, but some kind of retribution is something that people want.
Topic a bit. Sorry, I haven't read the book myself yet, but in the summary, in the introduction, the essay was talking about the high town, low town, and this expiry deadline.
So Tolkien, who gave us appendices to books, who gave us timelines.
Gautham's previous books, a lot of things are driven by arguments and debates and all of that and stuff like that, and most people will definitely go into this from the lens that you are a constitutional scholar and a writer. But there's also the thing that of course touch upon the concept of basic structure and to what extent it is valid forever or not valid, how much rights.
So and then the real answer. The funny and sad, also little sad answer is that my non-fiction outsells my fiction by a factor of 4. Right? So the non-fiction sells 4 times as much as the fiction. So it would be like quite weird for me to try and put ideas in fiction thinking that they'll get a wider audience, when clearly the non-fiction actually has a much larger audience than my fiction. Which I think is true for India in general. Like in India, non-fiction sells a lot more, and unless you're a superstar writer, fiction is very niche. SF is even more niche, right? So you're a tiny audience. That
larger sales is objective truth. Larger
book called the op-ed novel, and I think you know where I'm going with this. It's written by this writer called Bekir Seguin, and it's actually about the literary scene in Spain post-Franco. Now the interesting thing about the literary scene in Spain is that unlike in India or even unlike anywhere else, their major writers are also weekly op-ed columnists in the major newspapers, El País, El Mundo, and so on.
Reframe my question in this way. The way that this was described, putting someone into trial and sort of brings to mind the whole concept of under trial prisoners generally awaiting a trial somewhere. So was that somewhat
Not at all, because he's been conditioned. So he went through a summary trial in one day, he was convicted, and this is his sentence. This is the sentence, right? So this is his sentence, yeah.
If there is any exonerating evidence,
Yeah. But that's because the idea is that since we have found this way of bringing back people, we don't need death penalty anymore, right? So what would have been death penalty earlier now can become reversible. So it's more,
possibility for
Yeah.
So if there is
Yeah, so I mean, and this is actually a fundamental thing, right? So, when those of us who are abolitionists, right, when we are asked on that day 100 years ago, when that thing happened, name is police, like the director. So, I see, said Nila. She nodded. Well then, I'll continue with my investigation. She began to rise. Guardian Nila, said police quietly. May I say something? Of course, she sat back down. The past is a fragile thing, like a weave. You pull upon a strand and you don't know what will unravel. She looked at him. Ever since the fall of old empire, Peruma has been riven by conflict. Every time we begin to limp towards an equilibrium, something comes along and tears our old wounds wide open. The inflection points, yes. And now, this week, we might be heading into our 5th. I ask you to think once of the dead who feel they've been robbed of justice. Say their bitterness spreads and a day comes when it bursts into violence. It's been known to happen before, Director, upon this continent. Who's to say it may not happen again? And if it does, in my quest for peace, by believing I know the future, I've just done the city a far worse turn than I would apply the law. Because that's the point, Director. That's the point of having law. In a sanity. It takes, the law spares us from having to tell the future. It takes...
Okay.
When you're too cool to come
Yeah.
to the retreats.
The thing is that I'm literally like, each time there's been something going on that weekend. So I really want to come for one of them, like, and I keep telling